They said she couldn't last an hour in combat. The words had echoed in her ears since the day she joined the unit. Private First Class Elena Cruz wasn't the kind of soldier anyone expected to survive a battlefield. Too young, too quiet, too slight compared to the broad-shouldered Marines around her. She wasn't built like them, didn't talk like them, didn't even carry herself with the same swagger. Most of the Marines had served tours before. Elena, she was fresh out of training. She'd studied medicine, joined as a combat medic, and carried her kit with the seriousness of someone who knew lives depended on her hands. But the jokes still came. "Hey, Doc, think you'll make it through your first firefight? Bet she won't last an hour once the bullets start flying. Better stay behind cover, rookie." Elena never fired back with words. She just kept her head down, double-checked her equipment, and learned every face, every name, every injury pattern she might have to treat in the field. She wasn't here for glory. She was here to keep people alive. But deep inside, the sting was real. She wondered if maybe they were right. Could she hold steady when it counted? Could she run into fire when everyone else was running away? She didn't know yet. The desert would give her the answer. The convoy of Marines rumbled across a desolate stretch of desert, the kind where the sun burned like an open furnace and the horizon shimmered with heat. Dust rose behind every vehicle, and the silence of the wasteland pressed in heavy until it shattered. The first rocket slammed into the lead truck. Metal twisted, flames shot high, and chaos erupted. Gunfire raked from the ridges above, a storm of bullets tearing into the formation. Marines scrambled for cover, returning fire with everything they had. "Elena, stay down!" Someone shouted as tracer rounds streaked overhead, but her eyes had already locked on something no one else saw, or maybe what no one else dared to face. A Marine lay sprawled in the open sand, 30 yards ahead, cut down by a burst that ripped through his side. He wasn't moving much, but his hand twitched, reaching. He was alive, but barely, and he was trapped. The kill zone was wide open. Any Marine who tried to reach him would be torn apart before they got halfway. A sergeant cursed under his breath, scanning, calculating. The order came, "We can't get to him. Hold position." But Elena didn't move. Her pulse hammered in her ears. Her lungs seized in the heat. Her mind screamed at her that she'd never make it, and then she moved anyway. She ripped free from cover and sprinted into the open. Sand kicked up under her boots, bullets whined past her head, machine gun fire chattered from the cliffs. Marines shouted after her, orders, warnings, disbelief. "Elena! Get back!" But she didn't hear them. All she could hear was the desperate rasp of the wounded Marine, fighting for each breath. Step after step, she closed the distance. The heat burned her throat. Her pack felt like it weighed 100 pounds. Her body screamed to stop, but she didn't stop. She dove beside the fallen Marine, dropped her kit, and rolled him onto his back. Blood soaked the sand beneath him. His lips trembled, forming a word he couldn't finish. "I've got you," she whispered, her voice shaking. "You're not dying here." "Not today," rounds snapped overhead. The ground shook with mortars. She pushed gauze into the wound, wrapped bandages with hands that wouldn't stop trembling, then shouldered him onto her back. The weight nearly crushed her. But she rose. Step by step, she carried him toward the rocks where the others were dug in. Every stride felt like it would be her last. Her legs buckled. Her chest burned, but the thought was louder than the fear. "I won't leave him." By the time she crossed the last stretch, Marines were already rushing forward, laying down suppressive fire to cover her return. Strong arms pulled the wounded soldier from her shoulders, dragging him to safety. She stumbled, her vision spinning, and then, before she even knew if he was alive, her knees buckled and the world went black. When Elena's eyes fluttered open, the world was strangely quiet. For a moment, she wondered if she was dead. The roar of gunfire was gone. The smell of smoke still clung to the air, but the sound had shifted to muffled voices and hurried footsteps. She tried to sit up, but her body refused. Every muscle screamed. Her uniform was streaked with blood. Some hers, some not. An oxygen mask pressed against her face, and she realized she was lying inside a medical tent. "Easy, Doc," a voice murmured. She turned her head and saw the unit's medic beside her, adjusting a drip line. His hardened face softened when he saw her stir. "You did it. He's alive because of you." Her lips parted, cracked and dry. "The Marine? The one I carried?" He nodded. "Stable. He's not out of the woods yet, but without you, he'd already be gone." Relief washed through her like a tide. But it was quickly drowned by doubt. She remembered the chaos, the bullets ripping past her, the weight crushing her shoulders. She hadn't thought she'd make it back. And maybe. She hadn't really, because part of her still felt left behind in that firestorm. Outside the tent, Marines gathered in small knots, voices hushed but charged. Word spread fast in combat zones, faster than bullets sometimes. "Did you see her?" She ran into the open, carried him on her back through all that fire. Thought she was done for. But damn, she brought him back. Men who once laughed at her name now spoke it with something closer to awe. The rookie who wasn't supposed to last an hour had outlasted them all, if only by sheer will. The sergeant who had once told her to stay behind clenched his jaw as he replayed the scene. He'd ordered her to hold back, and she'd ignored him. By rights, he should have been furious. But anger didn't come. Respect did. Heavy and undeniable. By nightfall, the unit regrouped. The wounded were stabilized, the dead counted. Fires from the convoy still smoldered on the horizon. Elena drifted in and out of sleep, her body paying the price for what her spirit had demanded. She dreamt of the Marine's face, pale, weak, but alive. She dreamt of the sprint across the desert, each bullet that could have ended her story before it began. In the rare moments of lucidity, doubt crept back. Was it bravery or recklessness? She had disobeyed. She had risked not only her life but potentially the mission. But then she remembered the twitch of the Marine's fingers, reaching for help that no one else dared to give. And she knew. She'd made the only choice she could live with. Morning broke harsh and unforgiving. The sun rose over scorched dunes, painting the camp in cruel heat. A medic came into the tent and smiled. "On your feet, Doc. They're waiting for you," her brow furrowed. "Who's waiting?" "You'll see." With effort, she pushed herself upright, legs shaky, bandages tight around her arms. Every step outside the tent felt heavier than the last, but when the sunlight hit her eyes, she froze. Because in front of her, stretching across the sand, stood rank after rank of Marines, 500 strong, helmets tucked under arms, rifles grounded, silent, waiting. Her breath caught in her throat. The sergeant stepped forward, his voice low but carrying weight. "We don't forget what you did yesterday. You saved one of ours when the rest of us thought it was impossible." And then he saluted. One by one, like a wave rolling across the desert, 500 Marines raised their hands in unison, their salute crisp, sharp, and wordless. For a heartbeat, Elena stood frozen, overwhelmed. The rookie, the liability, the one they said wouldn't last an hour, was now the center of a silence louder than gunfire, a silence built of respect. Elena's throat tightened as she stared at the sea of raised hands. 500 Marines, silent and still, each gesture carved with discipline and meaning. She had imagined many things when she enlisted: drills, exhaustion, maybe even failure. But never this. Never the sight of battle-hardened warriors honoring her, the one they once joked wouldn't survive her first firefight. Her body trembled, not from weakness this time, but from the sheer gravity of the moment. She managed to lift her hand, shaky but firm, returning the salute. The desert sun caught the gesture, and for the first time since she'd joined, Elena Cruz felt like she truly belonged. The Marines lowered their arms in unison, but their eyes stayed fixed on her. No laughter, no smirks, only respect. The sergeant stepped closer, his voice gruff but steady. "You didn't just save a man yesterday. You gave the rest of us the spine to fight back. When we saw you charging out there, bullets flying, we remembered who we were. That's why we made it out." Elena swallowed hard. She had no speech prepared, no words for this. All she could do was nod, her chest heavy with emotions she couldn't name. She wasn't just the medic anymore. She was proof that courage wasn't measured in size or swagger. It was measured in what you were willing to risk when everything was on the line. Later that day, Elena visited the Marine she had carried. He was propped up in a cot, pale but alive, tubes running from his arms. His eyes opened when she stepped inside, and for a moment he just looked at her in disbelief. "You—" His voice was hoarse. "You're the reason I'm here." She tried to brush it off. "No, I just did my job." But he shook his head, firm despite his weakness. "No one else would have made it out there. You didn't just save me. You proved them all wrong." Tears stung her eyes, but she blinked them back. She wasn't looking for gratitude. She just needed him to live. Still, hearing those words, that validation, cut deeper than any wound. That evening, around the campfires, the Marines didn't tease her anymore. They didn't question her endurance. Instead, when she walked by, conversations paused for a heartbeat. Not the silence of doubt this time, but of acknowledgement. Respect ran thicker than words. Some nodded at her, subtle but heavy. Others patted the ground near the fire, wordlessly offering her a seat. She wasn't on the outside anymore. She was one of them. For Elena, it felt surreal. Not long ago, she'd been the butt of every joke, the rookie who supposedly wouldn't last. Now she carried something far heavier, their trust. As the stars stretched across the desert sky, Elena lay awake, staring upward. Her body still ached, her bandages pulled tight, but her heart felt strangely light. She realized she had crossed a line, not just in battle but within herself. She no longer doubted whether she could stand in combat. She knew, and the Marines knew too. From this day forward, her name would never again be whispered as a liability. It would be spoken with pride, carried on the voices of those 500 men who had stood together in the desert and saluted her. For Elena Cruz, the rookie medic, the story had only just begun, but already she had transformed into something unshakable, not just a survivor, not just a soldier, a Marine. Respect, however, wasn't a shield. It didn't mean she could rest. Within days, the unit was ordered into another operation, a sweep through enemy-held villages on the far edge of the desert. Intelligence warned of ambushes, hidden caches, and brutal close-quarters combat. This time, no one doubted Elena. They didn't tell her to stay back, didn't laugh at her loadout. But the weight of expectation pressed harder than the laughter ever had. She wasn't invisible anymore. Every Marine looked at her differently, and she knew why. They didn't just want her there. They needed her there. As they moved through the village ruins, tension coiled tight. The enemy wasn't waiting on the ridges this time. They were hidden in doorways, shadows, and buried IEDs. Every sound felt like a warning. Every corner could be the last. A corporal glanced at Elena as they advanced. "Feels like walking into a trap," he muttered. She just nodded, keeping her rifle steady. In her mind, the old doubts tried to whisper again. What if you fail this time? What if they find out the last mission was just luck? But she crushed the thought. The Marines weren't whispering doubts anymore. Why should she? The trap snapped shut 3 streets in. Machine gun fire tore down from rooftops, RPGs screamed into the alleyways, and grenades clattered across the ground. The unit scattered, ducking into cover. Screams of the wounded echoed against the walls. Dust and smoke turned the air into choking haze. "Medic! We need a medic!" Elena was already moving. This time, no one tried to stop her. No one told her to stay behind. They just fought harder, knowing she was diving headfirst into the chaos. A Marine was down near the blast crater, leg mangled from shrapnel. She skidded beside him, bandaging fast even as rounds chipped stone inches above her head. Then another cry cut through the air. Another Marine was hit, pinned under rubble. Elena's chest tightened. 1 wounded was enough. But 2? She made her choice. Dragging the first Marine behind partial cover, she sprinted into the crater again. She heaved at the rubble, muscles screaming until the trapped Marine gasped free. Both of them were bleeding badly, and now she was the only thing between them and death. She couldn't carry both on her back, not in this firefight. But she refused to leave either behind. So she planted herself in the middle of that narrow alley, rifle braced against her shoulder, firing burst after burst to drive the enemy back. Every round was measured, every shot fueled by the lives depending on her. Behind her, the wounded Marines dragged themselves inch by inch towards safety. It wasn't just rescue anymore. It was defiance. She wasn't only their medic, she was their shield. Her stand lit a fire in the others. Marines surged forward, unleashing a counterattack with fury that shook the village walls. Within minutes, the ambush collapsed. The enemy scattered, leaving their dead behind. Elena staggered back, both Marines now under the care of others. Her arms trembled from the recoil, her throat raw from shouting. But when she looked up, she saw it again. The eyes of battle-hardened men watching her with something close to reverence. Not because she had survived, but because she refused to let anyone fall. That day, no one needed to salute. They showed it in the way they fought, shoulder to shoulder, knowing Elena Cruz was among them, and this time she didn't feel like a rookie, or even a medic. She felt like the reason 500 Marines, and counting, still had the will to keep fighting. By the time the unit rotated back to base, Elena Cruz was no longer just the rookie medic. Her story had already traveled faster than official reports ever could. Marines who had never seen her in person spoke her name with respect. Commanders from other companies asked about the medic who ran into the storm. And around the fire pits at night, when soldiers traded war stories, hers came up again and again. But it wasn't only the Marines who were listening. On the other side of the desert, enemy radios crackled with chatter about the woman soldier who wouldn't break. It started during another mission, a reconnaissance sweep that should have been routine. The Marines intercepted enemy communications mid-firefight. Through the static, a voice spoke in harsh tones, but the words were clear. "Shoot the medic. The woman. She's the one keeping them alive." The translation came seconds later. Every Marine froze for a split second. They weren't just firing at random anymore. They knew her. Elena felt the hairs rise on her neck. She wasn't supposed to be noticed. Medics worked in the shadows, unarmed healers on a battlefield of guns. But now the enemy wasn't just fighting Marines. They were fighting her legend. That night, the weight of it sank in. She sat alone by the edge of camp, staring into the fire. For the first time she felt fear, not of dying, but of failing. If the enemy saw her as the key, then every life around her carried an even heavier burden. What if they're right? What if I fall and it breaks the unit? The sergeant sat beside her, silent at first. Then he spoke, low and certain. "They fear you because you gave us something they can't break. You gave us belief. Don't ever see that as weakness." She didn't reply, but his words lit a fire in her chest. The enemy tested that belief days later with their most brutal assault yet. Pre-dawn rockets screamed into the Marine camp, shredding tents and vehicles. Mortars followed, shaking the ground like an earthquake. Marines scrambled, weapons up, returning fire through dust and chaos. Elena was already moving, weaving through explosions, dragging the wounded to safety, patching torn limbs under fire. "Protect the medic!" Voices roared across the camp, but it was too late. The enemy had already marked her. A sniper round tore past, close enough to rip fabric from her sleeve. Another slammed into the sand at her feet. The shots weren't random. They were hunting her, but instead of breaking her, it steeled her. Every bullet aimed at her was proof. She mattered. Every shot meant the enemy saw her as the heart of the fight, and that meant she had to keep beating. Through the smoke, she carried another Marine on her back. Her legs threatened to buckle, but her will refused. The unit fought harder with every glance at her, refusing to let her stand alone. The assault raged for hours, but the camp held. When the dust settled, the ground was littered with enemy bodies. And among the survivors, one truth rang louder than victory. The enemy didn't just fear the Marines anymore, they feared Elena Cruz. From that day, she wasn't just Doc or the rookie. The unit gave her a call sign, Iron Heart, because bullets couldn't stop her. Doubt couldn't break her, and even the enemy had learned that her heart beat stronger than their fear. The desert night was quiet, too quiet. Intelligence confirmed that an Allied patrol of 20 Marines was missing. ambushed, dragged into the labyrinth of canyons where even air support couldn't see. Command hesitated. Sending reinforcements risked walking straight into another trap. But Elena didn't hesitate. "If they're alive, they're waiting for someone," she said firmly. "And if that someone isn't us, then they're already dead." The sergeant frowned. "This could be a suicide mission." She strapped her medic bag tighter. "Then I'll walk first." Under moonlight, the squad moved like shadows. Every footstep crunched on stone, every whisper of wind echoed against the canyon walls. Elena led them, headset pressed against her ear, picking up faint signals on frequencies the enemy thought were hidden. She stopped suddenly. "Left ridge, 2 guards," she whispered. Moments later, suppressed shots cracked. 2 enemy fighters dropped. The Marines stared at her. She had heard them before anyone saw them. Step by step, she guided them deeper. The canyons grew narrower, darker, filled with the smell of dust and cordite. At last, they found the missing Marines, bound, beaten, but alive inside a cave. Relief flooded the unit, but it lasted only seconds. "Ambush!" someone shouted. Gunfire erupted from the cliffs. Dozens of enemy fighters swarmed the canyon, pouring down like a flood. The Marines scrambled for cover, firing back, but they were badly outnumbered. The sergeant cursed. "We'll never make it out." Elena stood in the middle of the chaos, bullets ricocheting around her. She yanked the headset from her bag, twisting dials with precision. "They think they own this frequency," she muttered. "Let's remind them who's really listening." Her voice cut through the battlefield, calm, commanding. "This is Ironheart. You came for us. Here we are. But if you think you'll walk out of this canyon, you're wrong." The enemy froze for half a beat. Then panic spread as her broadcast hijacked their comms, feeding them false commands. Fighters turned the wrong way. Mortar teams fired on empty ridges. Their chaos became the Marines' salvation. "Move!" Elena shouted. "While they're blind." The squad surged forward, carrying the rescued Marines with them. Gunfire echoed, grenades thundered, but with every step Elena's voice cut through the noise. Steady, unbroken, unstoppable. Halfway out of the canyon, an explosion rocked the ground. A Marine stumbled, bleeding heavily. Without thinking, Elena threw him over her shoulders and pressed on. Her legs screamed. Her lungs burned, but she refused to stop. Every Marine who saw her found strength they didn't know they had. They weren't just fighting to survive anymore. They were fighting to keep up with her. By dawn, smoke and silence hung over the battlefield. The enemy was broken. The Marines were battered but alive. Back at base, Elena collapsed from exhaustion. Hours later, when she woke, 500 Marines stood outside the medical tent. Word had spread of what she had done. When she stepped out, they stood in silence. Then, as one, they saluted. The sergeant's voice carried above the rest. "You were once called a liability. Now you're Ironheart, and don't you ever forget it." For the first time, Elena smiled through tears. Not because of medals, not because of recognition, but because she knew she had proven them wrong. Not with words, but with every life she had carried through the fire. Her name would never again be spoken as doubt, only as strength.